On weekends, we talk history on the Final Word Cricket podcast. It's another story time with me, Adam Collins, and him, Jeff Lemon. Good evening to you. It's Friday night where you are. It is Friday afternoon where I am.
Friday night, I trashed your party. Saturday, I said, I'm sorry. Thus wrote Billy Joel. We often like to start the show with the Billy Joel quote. I know it's Adam's favourite part of the show. And I intend, is it trash or crash? I'm not sure. But I intend to do both to your party on this Friday.
What a raging Friday night it is for you. It must be about midnight there now, right?
Yeah, just gone midnight. So it's actually Saturday, technically.
Okay.
12:01.
Took it for a drink.
Well, it is. I will. But this is what we do for fun and for social interaction. And look, I'm not going to argue with it. It's worked for the last year, and long may it continue.
Yes, indeed. So to explain what we do on the weekend show, if you're new to the Final Word, which you might be, because our YouTube channel is ticking over in such a way that I know we're finding new people on this podcast week to week, which is just lovely. If this is your first story time, welcome to you. Jeff, why don't you explain what it is that we do before having a gentle intro and a soft start before we get to Nerd Pledge?
Sure. Well, yeah, if you're new, grab a seat, put your feet up. Up to you whether you want to take your shoes off, but I'd ask you to make that decision in the best interest of everybody, not just yourself. Now, we like to tell stories on Storytime. Cricket has a rich history. It's not just about international cricket going back to 1877. It's the hundreds of years before that into Dutch fields where they had sheep attracting implements that they used to thump around globs of like things jammed into intestines presumably and tied up in some sort of knot. It was a horrible time to be alive, but they had to find something to try to make that worthwhile, and that was an early form of cricket, and on it went to this day and into the future as well. The stories of cricket will outlive us. The Bannerman record will outlive us, and so we just like to dip into the eddying currents of cricket past, present and future, and pull out a few shiny silver fishes of interest to show you.
That's nicely explained, or perhaps just confused matters yet further. Time will tell. Jeff, before we get to those numbers, we've had some correspondence which I thought we'd deal with off the top. One of those notes was from Adam Pike in relation to Marnus Labuschagne, Jeff, and I might let you take it away, actually.
Yeah, well, Adam's been communicating with me. We've been DMing a little bit, and because he'd noticed while looking at the World Test Championship numbers that Marnus had never been dismissed, had scored 1885 runs in the World Test Championship. Did I say never been dismissed? Had never been not dismissed.
Yes, that's better.
He'd never been not out. Yeah, so he has been dismissed every time that he's gone out to bat. And so Adam was like, okay, I wonder if he's got the most runs of someone who has never been not out. So he asked me to find out for him, and that's the kind of guy I am. I did. Turns out Marnus is third all time now for batsmen who, in Test cricket, have never been not out while making over 1,000 runs. It's never happened in women's tests, but there are about 15 players who've got to 1,000 runs plus in men's tests with no not outs. And I felt pretty vindicated because my first reply to Adam said, I'm pretty sure they'll mostly be openers. And they were. Ed Cowan, 1,001 is the lowest of the 1,000 plus types. But Marnus is third, and he's only about 220 runs behind Kaushal Silva. You might remember the Sri Lankan wicketkeeper batsman who opened the batting mostly in Test cricket. So he's top of the pops with 2,099. And coming in second, you'll be very pleased to know, sports betting enthusiast Salman Butt. What a surprise that Salman Butt, the once-time captain of Pakistan, never got the red ink, always got out. What a curious surprise that happened. But Marnus will have him covered with 5 more runs. So, you know, a couple of good test matches, and he could have that mantle until he achieves his first not out, if he ever does. Yeah,
what a surprise that Salman Butt has a rare statistical occurrence next to his name as a test player. Who would have thought it?
Who would have thought, especially one that involved getting out every single time you bat. But yeah, you know, there are a few interesting names in there like Andrew Hilditch and Sean Massoud and Foxy Fowler. Rory Burns is up there as well. Brendan Nash, who we discussed recently, who was the one-time Australian who played for the West Indies, although he was a middle order type. So just an interesting little statistical diversion that I've had over the last few days.
I think every player you've mentioned there has featured on Storytime in the last 6 weeks or so as well. So a good collection of mostly opening bats. And Jeff, the other message we received, which we thought we would deal with off the top, was from Dan Bradford. And this relates to where players hit sixes and it is against their interest to do so. This will take some explaining.
Yes. When would you rather be caught than hit a six in a cricket match? And there is one context, which is that if a ball, as Dan Bradford, Dan Bradford wasn't the one who brought this to our attention initially, but as Dan Bradford's followed up, if there's a borderline waist-high full toss that could or might not be called a no ball, and you hit it over the fence, generally an umpire tends to err on the side of not going to call that a no ball because you've hit it for six and you've had your fun already. But if you get caught off it, then a third umpire review might be taken by the umpires in the middle, and they might have another look, and they might then decide that it is a no ball, and then you'd also get the run for having crossed over. So you'd get a couple of runs and you'd get a delivery to face again. And if you needed, say, 8 runs from the last ball of a match, you'd rather get out off that delivery and then have it overturned than hit it over the fence for 6. And Dan Bradford pointed out an example where an umpire review would have been handy, and he dropped in a quotation from some ball-by-ball commentary online, I assume. The final ball of the Women's T20 World Cup match between Australia and New Zealand, Ash Gardner bowling to Katie Martin, who hits a 6. The quote says, "Full toss, angled across. It looked high, but perhaps marginal. She shuffles and swings it away towards deep mid-wicket, where the catch goes down and the ball lands on the boundary cushion on the full. But it matters little as New Zealand go down here." And Dan says a no ball would have meant 4 to win off the free hit. Australia deserved winners, and as they say, the rest is history. Very interesting.
Is that how you interpret that? Like, is that the quintessential example of where a player is better off not hitting a 6? Or, I mean, in terms of the way that match finished up?
Not quite, because it would have been 10 to win off the last ball before the ball was bowled. And so if the catch had been taken rather than dropped onto the rope and they'd reviewed it, they would have added 2 runs to the score and had 1 ball to go, but they would still have needed 8 from the last delivery. And so unless there'd been another no ball. But I suppose you could say the 6 finished the match and made sure New Zealand definitely lost the match, whereas even if they'd needed 8 to win off the last, they might have then, got a wide or something like that. So the fact the catch was dropped was in Australia's interests. It was in, I think, was it Jess Jonathan in the deep, I reckon?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yep.
And so had she taken the catch, it would have been to Australia's detriment. It was the best option to drop it onto the boundary cushion for 6 and finish the game.
Thank you, Dan Bradford, for bringing that to our attention. And John O'Halen as well. What's now becoming a regular segment on Storytime, Jodie Hicks Watch, given she's going so well in Sydney club cricket to end her season, Jeff.
Yes, Jono, open inverted commas, Van, close inverted commas, Halen, on the back of his future talent footy card. Jono says, "This is becoming a pleasant exercise. Hicksy had another great day yesterday, bowling first. Sydney restricted Gordon to 7 for 171 from 50 overs. Hicks taking 1 for 23 off 5 overs. Wicket!" What's never been allowed to bowl in the Big Bash in 6 seasons, can take polls. Hicksy entered the stage, says Jono, with the bat at 2 for 64 and wasn't dismissed until the total got to 146, thanks to her 49 from 68 balls. Sydney won by 6 wickets. A great team effort, but excellent to see our star player do so well. Let's hope Jodie's form continues as Sydney take on Bankstown in a knockout semi-final at Drummoyne Oval this Sunday on Hicks Watch. Stay tuned to the final word.
Yeah, John O'Halen, make sure you let us know as soon as that game's come to its close. Send us a DM with the scorecard, and we'll be back with Hicks Watch next week. Jeff, with that all said, with that all done inside the first 10 minutes, it's time for us to play a little game called
Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge.
What must the people in your house think when that's going on? Because you're not the only person that lives there.
I don't mind. They don't question what I'm up to. It's best not to. Yeah, so someone was nerd pledging along with me in the supermarket, they said, and attracted a lot of strange looks when they they decided to karaoke with the Nerd Pledge when the podcast was in their headphones. So watch out for that one. But Nerd Pledge is the game that we play with people on our Patreon page. They support the show by sending us an amount of currency, but not a regular amount, not a round amount, a very specific amount that for them means something to do with cricket. And for us, we don't know what the link is. We have to figure out what it means. This is the game. For instance, Rob Taylor, our first new number off the rank, sent us £2.99. I'm assuming, given this clue is about England. There was a clue. You don't have to send a clue, but you can, and Rob did, saying this Yorkshire batsman couldn't really hit it off the square in T20 internationals. And we did not know what this meant, and we chatted with Rob a little bit and said, okay, nudge us here. And he said, look, the key word in the clue is square. As I know you guys aren't into mathematical operations, I had second thoughts after a late night beer inspired me to give you a clue like that. But we're not as stupid as we look, Adam Collins. And we thought, hang on, Yorkshire, square, root.
That's right. That's how we got there. Rob, thank you. And I'm glad we're able to start the show with him. He was very pleased to hear that we're up to $2.99 for him. Square root, Joe Root. Quite relevant to the game of cricket we're about to watch soon, actually, Jeff, because we're going to review all of the India-England T20s on our YouTube channel over the next week and a half or so, and this relates to T20 cricket and Joe Root's T20 record. So, as Rob sort of pointed towards, he doesn't play a lot of T20 cricket at the moment for England, but he did. He absolutely did before the 2016 World Cup, where England, of course, make the final and go ever so close to winning the bloody thing. So in Root's first 20 T20 internationals, he averaged 39.6 with a strike rate of 139. So even in today's money, that's still very effective. He's getting a game in really every team in the world, I'd imagine, with that record. But after the 2016 T20 World Cup, where Root nearly wins the final with the ball, we shouldn't forget either. It was Chris Gayle who got in the first over, wasn't it? An unexpected man to send down the first over of the final, but I digress. He's only played 12 games in the next 5 years, a strike rate of 107 and an average of 29.9, which surely is what Rob's referring to, which seems a bit odd because it's not as though Root's powers against the white ball have decreased in 50-over cricket. He's only got better and better, and he's an all-time great for England in 50-over cricket. But, yeah, now not getting those opportunities in the T20 side, his record has diminished in those 5 years, and I'd kind of be surprised if he was a part of their thinking for the T20 World Cup this year. He might get a couple of opportunities between now and when they go to that tournament, but yeah, it feels as though they're sorted for players at the top of the list, which is roughly where he'd be playing. Sorted for ease and whiz.
Yep. You get the feeling that 2016 was the point where Trevor Bayliss was saying, the renovations are done, this is how we're doing things now, mostly in the 50-over format, but that just the same template applied to the 20-over format, which was have hitters and have them all the way down. And they did have room for Root in the 50-over team because you did need one firewall batsman just in case you had a really bad day and, someone who could be the difference between 130 and 190 and maybe staying in a game if you'd had a collapse. But for the most part, it was hitters. And there's maybe not time for a player like that in T20 cricket. A lot of sides still pick one, but you look at the way the West Indies go about it, where it's just pick people who can hit sixes and that's it. Like, that's all you need. Dot balls don't matter. Building an innings doesn't matter. Hitting the most sixes matters, and that tends to win you the most games. And that's, they've made an art form of that. So I guess that's why Root's been squeezed out, because you match him up against any of the other options who could be in there, whether that's Roy or Bairstow or Morgan or Stokes or even Moeen Ali, players like that. They can clear the fence more, and they will.
Yeah, and all the data points to that, isn't it? It's about hitting the most sixes. That's why the West Indies have been so effective. And, I mean, really, even extrapolating that strike rate out, what does 28 off 20 balls mean these days? It probably means you're not going well enough, which, reflects how T20 cricket has changed a bit as more and more players get exposed to the Indian Premier League and other domestic competitions. But anyway, Rob, that's your number. That's your man, Joe Root, $2.99. Next up today, Jeff, is $2.85 from Debashish Biswas. Now, this was in pounds, I should say off the top, £2.85. There are a variety of options you have as far as currency is concerned. And there is a clue. The clue is golf. That's all it was. He added that he realises that clue's too short, so I will add some grass and hair. It does not refer to England or Australia. Perhaps his bowling, like the clue, may have been aptly described using synonyms for being cruel, harsh, and without compassion. I had wanted to put in a lower number to reflect how parsimonious his bowling had been. What verbal description can you link grass and hair? And Jeff, I can think of a few people better who I know to do that than you.
Well, initially I was going off on the golf tangent because that clue came in first, and I was looking around for 285s related to golf and cricket and finding stuff as compelling as the fact that last November at the Masters in Augusta, a golfer shot 285 at the Masters and became the oldest player to make the cut at Augusta, age 63, and his name was Bernard Langer.
Oh, Bernard Langer, the great Bernard Langer.
Yeah. Well, look, that was as tenuous as it got, and I feel bad for even mentioning golf. Not a sport I endorse. If you're a golf person, go have your fun. But this is a cricket show. Our mate Percy Holmes, who we've talked a lot about over the last few weeks, who played in the early 1900s, made a 285 for Yorkshire, and Ranjit Singh's highest first-class score was 285 for Sussex, but they both played for England, so can't be those. And then the extra clues came in, and I was thinking, okay, what about synonyms for cruel, harsh, without compassion? Might you say such a person or action was barbarous? You might. Okay, what links grass with hair? They both get cut. Some people employ other people to come and cut them. Some, like me, do it myself when locked in a hotel room. But they both get cut. Okay, if I were looking for a cricketer who would cut hair, who better than Zulfikar Barber? Now, was that a career cut short? Well, yes, it was a late start, but only played 15 tests, 53 wickets. Started really well and then got cut off pretty promptly. And was he parsimonious? Well, have a little look at his career economy rate. It just so happens to be 2.85 runs per over, the number that we were sent by Debashish Biswas. That's my bet, Zulfikar Barber.
It has to be right. Debashish, if Jeff's wrong, lie to him, because that is so well done. Barbarous, Barber, Zulfikar Barber, 2.85 runs per over. A player who, Jeff, we both loved on the final word too. Even before the final word existed, we were calling his first series On Your Sofa in Davies Street back in 2014, the first time we commentated together. So a lovely link back to our relationship too. So, as I say, Debashish, even if Jeff's got that radically wrong, don't tell us.
Yeah, just lie to us sweetly, lie to us softly. Look, that didn't connect with golf, I realise, but maybe the golf thing was about cutting the grass. Maybe that was the initial thing, and that your greenskeeper has to keep the grass cut. You know, they're very proper about their maintenance of golf courses. I'm not sure. Look, it's tenuous, but it's great. So that's what we're going with.
Yeah, I suppose if the original clue was simply golf and we got to Zulfikar Barber, it probably needed a couple of links on the way. Although I think the original clue did have a couple of links. So I'll give Debashish the benefit of the doubt there. But thank you for that excellent pledge. Fantastic clue and beautifully solved by Jeff Lemon, who also starts off on the next number, which is 337. That's Martin Blackburn and Alex Veljanovski. And we're going to start with Martin, who has the clue. His nerd pledge will need a lot of digging about it to solve. A lot of digging in for 337. Martin Blackburn, I've got a feeling I know what you're going to do here, Jeff.
Got an inkling. Yes, he spelt diggin as one word, D-I-G-I-N. So who digs in for 337 must be Hanif Mohammed, the Pakistani opener, who was a young man at the time. And I realise we talk about the 337 quite a bit in passing, but I don't think we've actually gone into the detail of the 337. Yep. So allow me to indulge myself here. Well, we know that the headline number is 337 runs, 974 minutes, although Hanif Mohammed claims forever that it was 999 minutes because he had a gramophone record on which there was a radio news broadcast talking about the innings in which those were the stats they gave. So he insisted that the record keepers were wrong. Either way, it's still the longest test innings by a long, long way. It'll be interesting if anyone ever falls between 974 and 999. That will be an interesting one for the statos to solve. So the context, it's Bridgetown, Barbados, where they're playing. It's 1958. I mean, this is, Pakistan wasn't recognised as an independent country until about a decade before that. They'd only been playing test matches for 5 or 6 years. And they're facing a West Indies team that has Garfield Sobers, Everton Weeks, Clyde Walcott, Rowan Canai. They've got the fast bowler Roy Gilchrist, who was a very frightening prospect. The West Indies smash them around, declare for 579, bowl out Pakistan for 106, make them follow on, and they're 2.5 days in, and it's a 6-day test. So the job for Hanif Mohammed, who's opening, is you have to bat for 3.5 days. So he does. He made 17 in the first innings, second top score when they got routed. And then the second time around, he bats for more than 3 full days, midway through the third day until after tea on the 6th day, in extremely hot conditions, more than 9 sessions at the crease, 3 different nights going to bed knowing that he had to get up and keep going tomorrow, and just kept on going. Al Valentine was bowling in that game, the West Indies great spinner, Gilchrist as well, and the pitch was starting to misbehave after about the 4th day, but he stood firm. And the crazy thing is that in that Pakistan innings, there are no other centuries. And there are only 2 other 50s, and yet they put on these massive partnerships. They just dig in one after the other. So the opening partnership's 152, the next one's 112, the next is 154, the next is 121, then 59, and then the 28-run stand is the one broken when Hanif Mohammed gets out late on the 6th day, edging a ball behind. So they lost a couple of tail enders quickly after that, but they were 185 ahead, and there wasn't enough time for the West Indies to try to chase down that score. So they'd made 657 for 8, facing 319 overs in the innings. What's that, 5 new balls? It's the second longest team innings ever after the time that England made 900 and whatever against Australia and faced a few more overs in doing so. And this is a kid who was 23 years old. He made 11 other test hundreds in his career and made his first class 499 a year later. And 2 tests after he made the 337, Garfield Sobers breaks the world record with 365 in the same series. So not a lot of fun for the bowlers there, but that is the dig-in 337 for Martin Blackburn.
So nicely done. I'm glad we've done that, because we have done the 499 in the past and the run-out, and I think Daniel Norcross might have done it with us on our Nerd Pledge quiz at some point in 2019. But it's only right that, you see that 337, you see 974 sitting next to it. Of course, it's going to come with a mighty tail, and that it does, and that we've now heard. So thank you, Martin, for that.
I'm just glad that it was a great, it's one of the few great triples, because most of the triples are shit. Most of the triples are on flat decks, a team batting first, just piling up a massive lead, whatever it is. This is a triple that's to save the game. This is a triple where there is no other option. It's not glory. He's not batting that long, just to keep racking up the numbers because they've decided, who cares, it's a draw, sort of Lara in Antigua style.
Right.
He has got to make those runs. He's got to be out there for that period of time and might as well make the runs while he does it. It's like Lawrence Rowe's triple, Hanif Mohammed's triple, Brendan McCullum's triple. I reckon they're about the only good ones. There might be one more that I'm forgetting, but there's 3 or 4 that are actually important, difficult innings, rather than someone got the best batting track of their life.
Yeah, I think one of our most downloaded episodes ever of the show is all triple tons of rubbish, after David Warner made his 335 a couple of years ago, where he went through a similar framework. I'm going to stick with the theme for Alex Veljanovski, the theme of triple tons, and indeed the theme of 900s. This might be the most beautiful scorecard I've ever seen. This might be, and this is a game I had no knowledge of until a few hours ago. Okay. And it's a match which I'm going to follow up, and I'm going to see who's still alive, who played in it, and try and interview some people and write about it, because there's too much here to stop with simply a 2 or 3 minute retelling. So now I've completely overstretched expectations. This will no way stack up, but I'll give it my best shot. So we know about Hanif's 337. I just kind of assumed that'd be the only 337 in first-class cricket. A number like that, it's so high up the pecking order, but there's actually been 4 of them. KL Rahul at the Chinnaswamy in 2015, Daryl Cullinan at the Wanderers for Transvaal in 1993, just before running into Shane Warne for the first time in that summer of 93-94. The second of the 4, however, so after Hanif Mohammed, was another Pakistani in 1964, a man by the name of Pervez Akhtar. in a game between...
What a combination, by the way, of Shoaib Akhtar and former President Pervez Musharraf. The real dream combination of the two.
Yeah, so Pervez was playing for Railways against a club by the name of Dera Ismail Khan. That sounds like a name, but it was the name of the club in question. The game was played at Lahore. And
there's a train station near Northcote called Dennis, so you can call a cricket team whatever you want.
That's true. And Anstey. And I didn't know much about Anstey until recently, actually. But anyway, that's probably for...
Named after the Boomers centre, Chris Anstey.
I once tagged Chris Anstey into a post saying that. I'm glad they finally recognised you in naming a metropolitan railway station after you. But... great writer, Chris Anstey. If you want to Google some of his work writing about when he played in the NBA, he's an absolute gem. Anyway, early digression. Railways made 910 for 6, which is the 9th highest score in the history of first-class cricket. And that's not even like in the top 10 interesting things about this game. The 9th highest first-class score. And our man Pervez makes 337. He hits 35 boundaries. That's the only other... the denotation on the scorecard. I don't know how many minutes or how many balls he faced. He came in when the score was 2 for 288, and he batted for the majority of the time until they reached 910. There's another double ton in there and a couple of other centuries. This is when it gets even more interesting. So, a bloke's made a 100, and they've made 910. It's one of the highest first-class scores of all time. Then Dera Ismail Khan, playing their first-class game of all time, get bowled out for 32, and then they get bowled out for 27. And it's all over in the space of 28 overs. So they've been in the field for 3 days. Then they get rock and rolled for 32 and 27, all in the space of a couple of hours. And they lose the game by an innings and 851 runs, which is by a mile the biggest margin ever in first-class cricket. The second biggest was when Victoria beat Tasmania by an innings and 666 runs in 1922-23. So 185-run gap. It's a record that'll never be beaten at Lahore in 1964 between the Railways and Dera Ismail Khan. Now, we've already dealt with the triple ton. Let's deal with the bowling innings, shall we? So all out 32 the first time around. Afaq Khan takes 7 for 14 with his left arm seam. Of course, someone's going to cash in big time when you bowl out a team for... team for 32, and Afaq Khan...
typically whoever's bowling the first over is probably going to take 3 wickets in it.
And he did very well, but he didn't get a trundle in the second innings. They go, you know what, champion? You have yourself a breather. In the second innings, a chap by the name of Ahad Khan, no relation, Ahad Khan, opens up bowling leg breaks and takes himself a handy 9 for 7. As they bowl him out for 27 the second time around. So we've had a 7 for 14 and a 9 for 7. That's the second most frugal 9-wicket bag in the history of first-class cricket, behind a chap by the name of Gideon Elliott, who for Victoria against Tasmania again, actually, in 1858, bowled 19 overs, 17 maidens, 9 for 2 with his right arm round arm. That was Gideon Elliott. And second to him is Ahad Khan. Ahad Khan, 9 for 7, bowling leg breaks. Now, back to Lahore. So the Khans are no relation, and they've picked up 16 for 21 between them in the space of a couple of hours. And you contrast that to the poor old opening bowler for Dera Ismail Khan, who picked up 1 for 279 from 59 overs. A bloke by the name of Iniatullah. So Iniatullah, 1 for 279 from 59 overs on first-class debut. Indeed, all of the players from Dera Ismail Khan were on debut. None of them have played a game of first-class cricket again, and none of them played one again either. So they all made their debut and were one and out, every player.
There's probably no better way to ensure that you never play a game again. How'd you go, boys? Conceded 900 and then got bowled out for under 32 both times.
In a 3-day game as well. It all happened in the space of 3 eventful days there at Lahore. I'm not quite done as it happens. So John Houghton's written very briefly about this, friend of the show. His proposition is that Iniatullah with 1 for 279 with the ball and a pair with the bat has the worst career page ever. And it's hard to argue with that point that John's making there. As for the club in question. So Dera Ismail Khan get washed out in their only other game that season. Likewise in their only game of the next season.
They must have been so grateful.
Yeah. And
when the rain came.
And then they're not seen on the first class scene again until 1983. They get a number of games in 1983. And their first game back, in keeping with the fine history of the club, in the first innings, all out for 39.
A new club record.
Right, well, not even. It was the third lowest score in the 3 hits that had, all at 39. Their high score, that's right, club record for. I'm thinking it the other way around.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, sorry, right, you are.
Yeah, they've beaten their personal best. They must have been pumped. It must have been an absolute disco in the clubhouse that night.
Oh yeah, the Dera Ismail Khan disco. They talk about that. It's like the St Kilda disco down at Moorabbin in the 80s. Then they weren't yet finished at first class level. As recently as 2018, they're still spotted in the occasional Cricket Archive. You know the miscellaneous tab on Cricket Archive? You can still find miscellaneous games they played in 2018. The last point on this game itself that I want to tell you, Jeff, and it's relevant to something that happened this week. And I told Daniel Norcross about this earlier and he nearly slipped off his chair. Kazir Khan, who was batting number 5 in the all-out 32 in the first innings, was out obstructing the field. He found time to get himself out obstructing the field.
No. You're all out 32 and you have to invent new ways to get out.
Oh.
And was he just tripping over the bowler as they came in? He's like, maybe if I just stop them bowling.
Well, this is kind of the point. Like, I don't know whether any of these players, presumably some of them would still be with us, but obviously there's no very, very little biographical information, even for Pervez Akhtar. So Pervez Akhtar, who made 337, which this number almost certainly doesn't relate to, but does for the purpose of my story today. He played 18 first-class innings between 1954 and 1967, just 12 games in 13 years. He makes 337 not out here in 1964, so a decade into his career, his highest score. His second highest score is in his next innings where he makes 81.
Okay.
And he hadn't made a score above 35 in any other game he played across his 13 years in first-class cricket. So he finishes with an average of 42.85 with a high score of 337 not out of a career tally of 600 runs. It's not even enough. Despite making a first-class triple, it's not even enough to get an entry on Cricinfo. All he's got on Cricinfo is that one line relating to his first-class analysis. No biography. That's it. Wow. And that's Pervez Akhtar sitting alongside for 333s. Hanif Mohammed, Darryl Cullinan and KL Rahul, and having contributed to the biggest margin in the history of first-class cricket, an innings and 851 runs, where two men with the surname Khan took 16 for 21 between them, where the latter of those, Ahad Khan, took 9 for 7, the second most frugal 9-wicket bag of all time. As I say, a pretty eventful 3 days at Lahore in 1964.
Oh, imagine you've made 300, you can't get past 35. You can't make 10% of your previous best score. You're unable to get past, to crack the 10% mark. I have two things to say about this. One is that surely Dera Ismail Khan's side were just some guys in the bar. Like, they could not have been cricketers. Like, surely you can't just show up. I don't even think I'm being facetious when I reckon the guy, the leggy who opens the second innings, I wouldn't be entirely reticent to say that if you let me get out 10 times, if you were like, go out and bat and you can get out 10 times, I reckon I could make 27.
Well, surely. You'll probably score more than 7 if you have 10 wickets at your disposal. He's taken 9 for 7. I mean, the fact that none of these players ever played a game. I mean, there's so many questions to ask about. We talked about status before, haven't we? This game had first-class status. The World Series Super cricket. Test did not.
Just not. Okay, but you said they're still kicking around, right? You said they're still playing games.
As recently as 2018, in the miscellaneous tab. So I reckon that if we put our minds to it, let's throw the net wide here. A lot of people listen to Story Time. You go on, Jeff.
Before you go down that road, this is important. You and I are both very keen to get 2 Pakistan.
Yes.
We're hoping that will happen next year. We should try to play a game for Dera Ismail Khan. We need to try to get picked.
Well, it's not that far
because the selection process is not rigorous.
Well, it's not that far from. It's 200 kilometres from Lahore. So, if we get there next year, I would imagine we'll be at Lahore at some point. So it's entirely achievable that we can make it out there. I reckon we should do a live show in their club rooms. Take it one step
all
further.
All of it. Let's,
Make
whatever
a real go of this.
they have that we can get involved with, let's get involved.
We've got to find. There must be someone. I mean, a lot of our friends that listen to the show are members of the Association of Cricket Scorers and Historians. I might have that acronym wrong, but
statisticians.
Statisticians. Okay. If you can,
maybe that's a different one.
If anyone out there basically has a link through to this club, or knows anybody who knows a guy, whatever it is, please let us know, because there must be some. The fact that none of them ever played again. What a great after dinner story it must be for a few of them. Here's the story when I bag a pair and get lashed for 279 from 59 overs as a bloke makes a triple ton and never seen again. Oh.
And the bloke who made the triple ton was obviously going to shit ass himself.
Yes.
You're like, I gave the worst cricketer I ever played against the best day of his career.
Yeah, if you do some root maths on that, if you exclude the 337 from his career, he only ends up with whatever that works out to be, 263 runs left across 12. I mean, he's averaging sort of 15 or something in his other innings across 12 years. It's a staggering story, Jeff.
Jesus Christ. Oh, thank you very much for sharing that with me, and with a heavy heart in a way that we have to move on
we do.
Other numbers. But I'm looking forward to the other numbers as well. One of them is from Matthew Jones. It's £1.13. Got a lot of pound patrons there. Everyone's UK today. Must have been when I was talking about geezers the other week. Apparently, without realising it on the last show when I lapsed into an English accent, it was just a Phil Tufnell impersonation. I didn't realise that that's where I was going to go, but that's how it ended up. Matthew Jones, 113. All right, geezer. So I'm suggesting Michael Atherton's ton against the West Indies in 1995 in what I like to think of as the Lara series. So at the point where Atherton makes that 100, it's 2-2 in the first two tests with 2 to play. England have been absolutely demolished twice, and then they've got away with a couple to get a couple of wins back, pretty close ones when the Windies have had middle order collapses. And then Atherton makes that score opening up at Trent Bridge to help ensure a draw, and it sort of gives them time to get their breath back, and they go on and bat big in the final test and draw that as well. And I reckon they're pretty relieved to escape from that series 2-2 at the time, England, but that 100 is one of only 2 England centuries in the series when they were up against Walsh and Ambrose and Kenny Benjamin and Ian Bishop all bowling well. Lara made 300s on his own and made 765 runs in a 2-2 draw, so I remember noticing that it was very similar to the Steve Smith Ashes, your 774 runs,
right, yeah.
2-2. Couldn't, the virtuoso solo performance that couldn't quite get them the series win. But that's my bid for Matthew Jones.
Very nice. And Matthew, for you, my friend, I'm going to give you some of this. Get yourself a dusty old bastard. It is the 113th man to play Test cricket for Australia, Jeff. Normally the DOBs relate to England, but this is one of the Australian variety, and this might be one of my favourites. It's one that I knew very peripherally about this story. The more I went into it, the more I remembered that I'd heard it before, but there's quite a bit to it. We often think about Keith Miller.
He's a man who does sound like a train station by name.
Yes, Roy Park. Roy Park is the man in question, and we think about the ultimate all-rounder from a Melbourne perspective being Keith Miller on the basis that he played state football, played VFL football, and obviously was Australia's greatest all-rounder, the military background there as well. Well, Roy Park ticks most of those boxes too, albeit just less time playing the sport. So 113th Test cap, but we'll come to that in a while. To begin with, before the First World War, he played 44 games for University, the defunct University Football Club, until they went out of business. And in 1913, he was the leading goal kicker in the competition, so the equivalent of the Coleman Medal as we think of it in these terms. He was balancing off cricket and football through this period of time before World War I. He played for Victoria in the summer of 1912, 1913. But going back before that, he went to school at Wesley College there in Melbourne on St Kilda Road, isn't it, Jeff? And he went to school with the man who would go on to be Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister, Bob Menzies. And there's a nice story that Menzies was very close with Roy Park and would make excuses to sit outside and read Shakespeare while watching his friend Roy Park net and hone his cricketing skills, which I thought was quite a nice link through. By the time he reaches adulthood, he's playing club cricket for South Melbourne, like so many Test players have done over the years, including Bill Woodfull, the Australian captain, who he shares a 315-run opening partnership with at Melbourne club level. It meant that it didn't take long before he gets picked in the Australian team, albeit an aborted trip to South Africa in the summer of 14-15. Of course, there was no way they were going to be playing Test cricket in the middle of that First World War. Through that 4-year stretch, he finished becoming a doctor. And, I mean, what didn't this guy do? You know, he's leading goal kicker for the VFL competition. He's playing state cricket. He's about to play international cricket, and then he trains as a medical doctor. He's mentioned in dispatches for his war service in Europe through the course of that conflict. He returns to sport after the war and makes a big double ton for the Vics against South Australia, and it's important because he's batting with Warwick Armstrong, who's then the Australian captain as well as the Victorian captain, and by the end of that 1919-1920 summer, he'd averaged 72 in the season and guaranteed that he'd be picked for Australia in the following year, which is when England were coming, 1920-21. Of course, it's the whitewash, which England are absolutely hammered 5-0, and Armstrong is the Australian skipper. So our man Roy Park gets to fulfil, I suppose, any cricketer's dream and make his Test debut at his home ground, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. However, it doesn't go well at all. So goes the story. He's about to face up for his first delivery in Test cricket, and his wife, sitting in the grandstand, drops her knitting needles, and she reaches down to collect her knitting needles as he's being skittled by England bowler Henry Howe for a first ball duck, which is obviously the worst possible way to start his Test career. And unfortunately, he didn't get much better than that because he didn't bat again. His one innings in Test cricket was a golden duck, and his old mate Warwick Armstrong gave him 1 over of off-spin when they were fielding, none for 9 from that over. Australia still win by an innings, and but he doesn't feature in the baggy green again. He finishes up with over 2,500 runs at first-class level, 9 centuries, including the aforementioned double against SA at an average of 40. Still maintains a huge involvement in sport, especially in cricket. He's a Victorian selector. And then his daughter, Lal, marries an off-spinner by the name of Ian Johnson, who, of course, became an invincible in Bradman's team in 1948 and later became Australia's Test captain. So his son-in-law was Ian Johnson. And that was Roy Park, Test cap number 113. He faced 1 ball and bowled 1 over.
That is a proper DOB story. No matter how illustrious your career was beneath that one appearance, it was still firmly in the area of one appearance. And it was Ian Johnson becoming captain that caused such a controversy when people wanted Keith Miller to have the captaincy and caused a lot of bad blood around that time in the 50s as well. So maybe Roy Park was involved in that decision if he was influential in Victorian cricket.
He might be. There's one other little fact I missed, which I thought you'd like, Jeff. 64 players have made a golden duck in their first innings in Test cricket, so a first ball duck, and 5 never got a chance to face a second ball. So Roy Park is one of 5 cricketers in the space of 145 years or whatever we're up to now to only face 1 ball in Test cricket, and for that to be the delivery they were dismissed by.
Oh, a club that you could fit into a Mazda sedan. Unlucky, Roy Park, unlucky. All right, that is a very long look at 113. Let's move it along to $3.25 from Bruce Walker, who's also sent through a line of his thoughts. Says, a great West Aussie, done it all for a long time, with a bit of emphasis on the long. So it can't be a cap number of 325 because that's David Boone, who is the opposite to a long Western Australian in every way, being a very short Tasmanian. But it did occur to me, Adam, that if I thought about cricketers who were long, aside from Ashton Agar's current nickname in the Australian team, Bruce Reid was about 3 metres tall and was always, I think he's more famous from the 12th Man tapes than just about any player, because Richie Benaud was famous in his own right, but everybody remembers Bruce Reid for that. But being so long and skinny that he'd snap in half and have to be fixed with sticky tape. But he was extremely long, and he was better known for his one-day bowling. Our number is 325. How many deliveries did Bruce Reid bowl in one-day international cricket? 3,250. 3,250.
Very nice, very nice. Well, it could be that. It also could be long Tom Moody, a great West Australian, as Bruce Walker hints towards. I thought it might have been his Test cap for about 2 minutes, but no, his Test average was 32.5. A couple of Test tons in those 8 matches, including one against Sri Lanka and one against India in Perth when he was recalled for the final test of the 91-92 series. So that's when Jeff Marsh is left out for the final test, and Alan Border's told about it just before they take the field on the final day at Adelaide, and Border is so angry that he refuses to walk out. He's on the phone giving Laurie Saul a piece of his mind, and as it turns out, Jeff Marsh in his final day in Test cricket ends up captaining Australia for about half an hour before Border joins the team. But yeah, Tom Moody was a phenomenal first-class cricketer, especially for Western Australia. He played 145 matches for them, averaged 42, 21 centuries, averaged 28 with the ball, 125 catches, mostly in the slips. There was kind of nothing he couldn't do. Was involved in 2 World Cup winning teams. He didn't play in the 87 World Cup final itself, but 3 games through the tournament. And then in 1999, he was a visionary selection from Steve Waugh, picking Moody when he was a little bit off the radar from an international perspective, but due to all that experience he'd collected from playing in England for Worcestershire, where he played between 1991 and 1999, making 32 centuries and averaging 50 in first-class cricket. He was just an enforcer for Worcester at 6'6", and again took loads of wickets as well as that primary all-rounder. That Steve Waugh just knew that Moody had to be there on those tracks, and he was brought back after Australia lose against Pakistan, makes runs immediately against Bangladesh, and we chart this on the final episode of the greatest season that was 99 World Cup, which we had Tom Moody join us for that documentary-style final episode, and he explains that Steve Waugh always wanted him there, part of the squad, and he ended up being part of that World Cup winning team. So as his batting average in Test cricket was 32.5, long Tom Moody, I reckon that's your man, Bruce Walker.
Very good. 3-2-5 for Bruce Walker. Also a lovely fella, Tom Moody. One of the good guys, yep. Very much so. Our next number comes in from Mike Lee, $2.36, also with a clue. Got a lot of clues today. A hero of mine, says Mike, far from his home and with the attributes to be a final word favourite. Well, with the attributes. So initially, I was looking at people who've made 236 in first-class cricket. There have been a lot of 236s, but not a lot made by players who were far away from home. The ones that fit that bill would be the South African Eric Rowan in a test at Leeds in 1951. He was a Wisden Cricketer of the Year the next time the book came out. Arthur Shrewsbury, the England opener, who played 498 first-class matches. One of them was in Melbourne in 1887, and it was the smokers versus non-smokers match, which was given first-class status, unlike World Series cricket. Smokers and non-smokers, in which the smokers made 803. Wow, it must have been a really top-notch quality game, deserving that status.
I wonder how they worked out who played for what team. I mean, if you just enjoy bumming a dart off your mate at 2 a.m. on the dance floor, are you in the smokers category? Yeah. I mean, the doctor would say, when you're ticking the form, as I've had to do at different points in my life, are you a smoker or a non-smoker? And you inquire as to what qualifies, and they make it quite stringent. And maybe well, when did you last smoke a cigarette? Well, I mean, Saturday night. Well, you're a smoker then. You're a smoker. You're a filthy... I wonder if there were a similar betting process went into that game.
Well, probably at the time the doctors were very worried about the health of the non-smokers because, they thought it helped scour your lungs out or whatever. Maybe if you lived in the fogs of London at the time it did. But it wasn't probably so much bum a cigarette in 1887 because you had to smoke a pipe. Probably took about 35 minutes to get it started with some sort of crank handle arrangement, and you had to get some flint out and, all kinds of things involved. So it was a real commitment to be a smoker. So 236 for Shrewsbury there. Stuart Law made one in Manchester, which is a long way from Queensland, but I kind of figured that a listener would be unlikely to tag Stuart Law as a likely final word fave. Maybe just due to the recent piece about Shane Watson's debut with Stuart Law's current approach to why it was good to just yell abuse at a teenager for several days on end. I don't know if it entirely fits that bill.
Yeah, I mean, I think the abuse I yelled at Stuart Law when he was walking off the ground during the 2002-03 would have been 304, Sheffield Shield final, when I acted like a complete tit in the crowd running up to the race and giving him a spray. But I've never had a chance to make amends for that. But I have interviewed him a few times, and he's quite a nice guy in real life. But hey, that's the way it often goes.
But one who might be more likely to qualify to be a favourite would be Carl Hooper, who made 236, not out, at Canterbury in 1993. He's probably already a final word fave because of the trivia question that you love to roll out, or you did before Jacques Callis ruined it. But it was the exact qualification, I can't quite remember, but it was something like who played more than 100 tests and one-dayers, made more than 5,000 runs in both, more than 100 wickets in both, more than 100 catches in both, made a one-day 100 and a test double 100.
That's it.
And until Callis ruined it with a double very late in his career, Carl Hooper was the only one who fitted that category.
Yeah, that's right. And Carl Hooper is loved at Kent. You occasionally see old YouTube reels that go around from county cricket, or it was, I suppose it was their limited overs competitions that got to run on television back then. But Carl Hooper was often a fixture of bludgeoning attacks in the early 90s when he was playing down there at Canterbury. So a fitting final word favourite, I agree, Mike Lee, with 236. Thank you. The next is a triple header, Jeff. A triple header to finish. Duncan Davies, Sebastian Greers and Sam Ashworth, who is a revisit. We've had Sam on the show recently. Let's do it this way. Why don't I start with Duncan
He's an
Davies.
edit, not a revisit.
Sorry, an edit. Right, you are. You can edit your number and get on the show a second or third or fourth or fifth time. We encourage that kind of behaviour. Duncan Davies did not give us a clue, which is nice, because what that means is that I can do it whatever the hell I want, and I have.
I can do what I like, governor. You can't control me.
I just kind of thought, Jeff, it's been a while since we talked about Sean Marsh.
It has. It's been at least 2 weeks, and I feel that lack. And
I feel as though his 148 for Australia is his most interesting Test century. There were there's probably one better, that being the one at Adelaide in 2017 against England, which was just a phenomenal innings. But the one right alongside it, as far as how important it was in the context of the Test and the series, was the first Test at Centurion in 2014. But it's hard to kind of get into that without giving the background. And Jeff, you wrote about this excessively, it could be said, at the time when Marsh was picked in that squad. He originally, if I recall correctly, was a substitute, and then he was called into the team at the last minute as an injury replacement, then got picked in the 11. It was all rather quick, and he leapfrogged Philip Hughes, who was the original spare batsman, and then Marsh was brought in at the last minute and then got a spot in the team for the first Test match.
He was, I believe, 27th in the Shield for runs.
Oh, no, it's worse than that. It is worse than that. Let me go through it.
Okay.
Let me go through it. So in Marsh's most recent stanza as a Test cricketer, it ran, this starts in the final innings in South Africa in November 2011, 0-0-3-0-11-3-0 and out, unsurprisingly. I think he averaged 2 against India across 4 Test matches. And then in the next summer...
2.85, I reckon.
2.85. You'd remember it, I reckon.
From memory. I'm not sure.
Never had a crash. 12-13, he averaged, the summer after, he averaged 19. So he didn't sort of...
I'm an excellent driver.
he didn't bounce back well after being left out of the team. And in 13-14, look, he improved on that. He made a couple of centuries and averaged 36, but... just 401 Sheffield Shield runs, the 34th most in the competition. Pretty much everybody who was seriously vying for a spot in the Australian team made more runs than that. But there he was, as I say, kind of the backup and then into the squad, then into the 11. It was a remarkable gut call, which absolutely paid off as he peeled off 148 of the best after coming in at 2 for 24 on the first morning when South Africa's pace attack were really up and about. He was out there for nearly 300 minutes, 15 boundaries, faultless really. Most of that was alongside Steve Smith. They were 4 for 297 at stumps with Smith on 91, and Smith comes back the next day.
A lot of it was with Alex Doolan, wasn't it? He made 87 maybe?
Yeah, so Doolan and Marsh, and then as you say, Smith takes over from Doolan. Doolan was on debut, wasn't he? And the Smith innings he often declares as the one that changed everything for him. I mean, he'd made a couple of tons against England the previous summer, including an important one at Perth, and had saluted at the Oval.
Sydney.
The Perth was the more important than the Sydney one, I think, though, in the Smith arc. And of course, made his first century at the Oval in the final Test of the 2013 Ashes. But at Centurion, Smith, as he explained, foreign conditions, a fantastic South African attack, and there was Sean Marsh by his side. But Australia get to 397, then, as we know, Mitchell Johnson, his last kind of epic performance, I suppose you'd call it, for Australia, taking 7 for 68. And Marsh makes runs in the second innings, makes 44, and Australia go on to win comfortably and thrash them by 281 runs. But the reason it's like the best possible microcosm of the Sean Marsh career is that, picked from nowhere, makes a faultless, brilliant century, a match-winning effort. Then in the next Test match at Port Elizabeth, lasts 3 deliveries. Wayne Parnell and Vernon Philander sought him out twice in the space of 3 deliveries when Australia lose the second Test, and then they drop him. Shane Watson was coming back into the team for the third and final Test match at Cape Town, and it was Marsh who was asked to make way just one Test match after, making his 148. So if his career is over, and we assume that it is, 38 Tests for 2,265 runs, an average of 34, 6 centuries, and the 148 at Centurion is the one that, yes, it will live in the memory for a long time for him, I'm sure.
And so much enjoyment along the way. Thanks, Sean. 148. The one for Sebastian Greers, sent through a clue to say his nerd pledge should actually be read as 48 for a final word favourite. So it's a 48, it's 148, but it's just 48. So a final word favourite and 48. Well, 1948 was Bradman's last Test match. And Bradman could be spoken of as a final word favourite. We talk about him quite a lot. Aside from the fact that he stabbed Clary Grimmett in the back in 1936. Clary Grimmett, incidentally, played 248 first-class matches and probably would have played more had he not been stabbed in the back by Don Bradman in 1936. You may have heard about that before. Ian Chappell averaged 48 in one-day cricket and 48 in first-class cricket, in which he batted 448 times.
Nice.
The first time anyone took 4 for 80 in a Test match was at Adelaide in 1908 by Arthur Fielder, who is a quick bowler from Kent that we've spoken about at some length. He's a fave because whenever you and I are at St Lawrence at the ground in Canterbury, there's this big picture of him on the wall with a big moustache, and the plaque under it just says, A Fielder.
A Fielder, yes, that's right.
That is a great cricket joke. He took all the wickets. Oh, A Fielder. Don't get your name on the scorecard. So he's a fave. In terms of 48 batting averages, Dave Warner's currently down to 48.09, which you could just round to 48, and that could qualify. 48 point whatever is a really good batting average number for Australians. Stan McCabe, Ponsford, Doug Walters, Neil Harvey, they're all in the 48s. Pretty good bunch to be amongst. Or if you want to look at exactly 48.00, Douglas Jardine, a very bad man who, for all of his ills, never stabbed Clary Grimmett in the back in 1936. That was left to his opposing captain. So there are a few options for 48, Sebastian. If we're wrong, if I'm wrong, let me know in a DM and nudge me closer to the truth. Yeah,
and in the case of Jardine, finishing with an average of 48, but sort of after the bodyline summer, his one Test century, 127 against the Windies at Manchester in 1933 was when they bowled bodyline at him, essentially. So he gave it out, but he had to cop it as well. And that was when he made his one Test ton and kind of was left out of the England team after having a string of high scores after that century. There's 3 half-centuries in his last 4 innings. So I wonder why he was jettisoned, Jeff.
Scapegoats. That doesn't sound like the British establishment. Not at all. The last one in our triple header is Sam Ashworth.
Yes.
148 for Sam. One thing that occurred to me is it was Aaron Finch's highest one-day score for a long time. It's not anymore, but I used to notice it because, and I say this as someone who greatly loves the Scotland cricket team, but it was made against Scotland, and there was always that thing when they flash up someone's stats, and if you've got your high score against a team where people might think you probably didn't have to try that hard, or maybe it didn't necessarily reflect that you were that good, that you got a big score against a team that wasn't in the top few. Some players didn't really like that. I think there was Ian Bell used to have that big one against Bangladesh that would come up when they were rubbish, and Herschel Gibbs one against Kenya maybe. There's the sort of things that are flashing back through my mind. And so Finch would always have the 148 that he made against Scotland in 2013. But in 2019, in the lead up to the World Cup and then in the World Cup itself, he made 153 twice and managed to nudge the Scotland one down the list. And then in that World Cup, Kane Williamson made 148 in that crazy West Indies game at Old Trafford when Carlos made the 100 at the end and thundered sixes all around the place, and then choked in the last 8 balls and lost the game that he'd miraculously put them in a position to win by getting too distracted by his 100.
Yeah.
Sorry, Carlos, but it's the truth.
Things you can talk about now but can't really talk about at the time. That was the most dangerous final word recording of 2019 in a fairly competitive field. Norcross and I were on the road back from the Aegeus Bowl. I think, Jeff, you were somewhere else that night. I think you were at a concert or something like that.
I was at Billy Joel.
You're at Billy Joel. There you go. To come full circle.
I genuinely was. Someone gave me a free ticket and I was like, you know what? I'm going to Billy Joel.
If you can't see him at Madison Square Garden, you can't see him in Red Square, you can see him at Wembley. We were recording that as soon as the final ball was bowled, where Trent Bolt takes that catch. Norky's darting through the streets of South London, and I've got a microphone held underneath him, and we were just holding on for that at that point, knowing we had to get it filed by a certain time. I can't remember the exact specifications of it, but I know it was a lot of fun. Right, so I'm going to take a stab at 148 one last time as well for Sam. Denise Annette's is an interesting story, and you'll like the statistical kicker that comes at the end of this. So Denise Annette's was an Australian batter through the course of the 80s and the early 90s for Australia, and a prolific one at that. And in 1992, she made 148 not out against England to beat the old enemy in the standalone Women's Ashes test of that year at North Sydney Oval. But I just wanted to put it in a bit of context. So the previous time the Women's Ashes had been played for in 1987, it had been over 3 test matches in England with 2 draws, and Australia won the other one. But back in 84-85, there were 5 test matches in Australia, which Australia won the series 3-1.
The one time they played a 5-match series.
That's it, yeah. So they went from 5 to 3-1 quite quickly, unfortunately, and now we're conditioned to how it is at the moment with 1 test match in the multi-format series, which is better than just sort of a standalone test match as it was in 1992 when they were playing for the Women's Ashes. Now, in that match, England batted first and were all out for 146. I wanted to note on the way through that Isabel Sarkiris, on her test debut, she was 32 years of age by this point, the off-spinner, finished with the quite remarkable figures of 27 overs, 16 maidens, 4 for 27. Her match analysis, and this is a bit of a digression, but allow me to go down this path, was 7 for 45, which means her overall test bowling average is 6.42 at 0.9 runs per over. So I know, Jeff, you like going out and having a look at players that have only turned out a couple of times, but her record is probably the best ever for someone that's played 1 test match. Anyway, back to the Australian reply to England's 146. They make 346 declared, and Denise Annette's coming in at number 3, and that's where she stayed in the middle for an unbeaten 148 in 448 minutes. And it was sort of a fine way to sign off on her test career. Of course, they go on to bowl out England comfortably for 115 and win the match by an innings and 85 runs. But for Annette's, personally, it was her final test. She finished with 819 runs at an average of 81.9. 2 centuries and 6 other scores above 50. So, as Stephen Lynch later wrote for Crick Info, if you look at a minimum of 10 innings, because of how few test matches the women play, that kind of makes sense rather than the 20 that we often use for men's cricket. She's the only player in the history of women's test cricket to finish with an average in excess of 80 at 81.9. So Joanne Broadbent had an average of 109.3 and also played 10 test matches, but for whatever reason she only batted 8 times in those 10 tests. So Annette's also averaged 42 across 43 one-day internationals, but yeah, finishing her test career with an unbeaten 148 and a remarkable test average of 81.9.
Very good. Thank you, Adam. We have come to the end of the new numbers for today. We have done many, and yet we have exhausted them. If you would like to send us a Nerd Pledge number, it is a very easy process. You get on the internet, which is how you're listening to this show. You already have access to it. I don't know how, but you must. You type in a web address. It is patreon.com/thefinalword. And once there, you can make an account, set your name, set your amount, set your frequency. You have full control over how much goes into the coffers. And then your number will go down on our list automatically, and we will come to it in due course. Please do so, as it is very nice to have you along for the ride.
It is indeed. It's also nice to have along for the ride with us a number of commercial partners with The Final Word, which is absolutely fantastic. We don't have anybody with us on this particular show in the middle of it, which means that this could be your space. If you want to work with us through the rest of 2021, coming into a really busy English international season, we've got some really big milestones we're about to hit on the final word for both our podcast feed and our YouTube channel. We've been growing exponentially in recent months. As many people listen to our show on Storytime as listen to our weekly show, which is kind of remarkable. It shows that there's a lot of interest in this weekend dance through the history of our game. So if you're interested in palling up with Jeff and I on this weekend show, drop us a line at finalwordcricket@gmail.com or find us on Twitter or send us a DM on Patreon. Wherever it is, we'll be happy to have a chat and work something out.
It is time for the revisits, the numbers that we haven't got right in the previous weeks, but we think that we might have got right now. A little bit of hinting, a little bit of nudging, a little bit of communication and correspondence. Clear and open and honest correspondence and communication. That is what is important. That is what makes relationships tick. And here we are.
Yes, Jeff. First up in our revisits is Maureen McCord, 250. Now, first time around, we said VJ Merchant. Then we talked about the Famine versus Cyclone 11. Maureen was delighted with our first attempts at deciphering the number. She says, my hearty cackles over the exploits of the Famine 11 and the Cyclone 11 duly terrified my cat. Though I, for one, was not surprised by the outcome. Cyclones may come out of the gate strong, but famines have staying power. Unfortunately, neither of your exceptional mid-century 250s are quite what I had in mind. Now, here comes the clue. The number references a career average. The link to Mankad, when the player in question played his last full Ranji season, a match in which he took Mankad for 2 sixes and gave the player possession of a record so genuinely useless that it should enrapture final word listeners the world over. Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Last week, we discussed England's first tour to India in 1933-34. And we briefly mentioned the captain, C.K. Naidu, who was one of the early greats of Indian cricket, one of the founding fathers. He was also the captain the year before that, 1932, in India's first ever test match, a standalone test played in England. And he was probably the driver of the recognition that England should be playing test matches against India, because 6 years before that, the MCC visited for some first-class games, and in a match at Mumbai, he made 153 of the first 187 runs in their match, hitting 11 sixes in an innings that took less than 2 hours. At the point that he got out, he'd scored 81% of the team's runs, but he was robbed of a bannerman by a good partnership for the 9th wicket. So in tests, he toured England for the first Indian test match, captained the home series 18 months later, and then toured England again in 1936 for 3 more tests. But he didn't captain on that tour because he got replaced by the Maharaja of Viziangram. Now, there are a lot of Nawabs and Maharajas and so forth in particularly early Indian cricket. The Nawab of Tonk, as far as we know, never got involved, but I wish that he had. But the Maharaja of Viziangram, who batted at 9 and didn't bowl, had a test batting average of 8. But having financed the tour, he decided that he should play and he should be the captain.
As was the custom.
Because it was his money. Yeah, just pop a useless rich bloke down the order. So, you know, he did play and make no runs and was a liability, and they got beaten badly. I think they drew 1 test. But C.K. Naidu made his best career score of 81 in the final match of that series and then didn't get to play another test match. So he played 7 tests and averaged an even 25, the 250 that is Maureen's original number. But he went on to play Ranji cricket for another 20 years, and his final first-class match was a charity game 2 days after his 68th birthday. Now, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something like the chief minister of Maharashtra's 11 versus the finance assistant secretary's 11. And guess what? It had fucking first-class status, didn't it? Didn't it? World Series cricket? No. The game that the 68-year-old bloke's playing in? Yeah, no problem. First-class status for you. So that was a few years after he'd last played Ranji, which is when the record that Maureen mentioned came about in 1957. He made a score of 84 in a Ranji Trophy game, batting against Vinu Mankad, hitting him for 2 sixes. And at the time, I looked up some of the info on this, which is a bit lumpy, but some of the ages are wrong and so on. But I've worked out that his actual age would have been 61, but he was still, as far as I can tell, the oldest player in first-class cricket to score his age or go past his age.
Are there some other
in a first-class cricket
some other
match?
sort of contenders that were? I mean, did you spot any other high-profile names in that list, or was it just kind of?
Look, I don't know, to be honest. I'm only taking this on faith that this is the record, and I don't entirely trust it because Wikipedia and so on have the ages wrong. But you know, there might be the odd sort of Wilfred Rhodes made up 50 when he was 52 or something. Who knows? But yeah, apparently our man CK has got that covered.
I'm looking forward.
More into number.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing whether a couple of the old timers we've been keeping a close eye on, Darren Stevens and Suwanji, if they can.
WG Grace made some big runs in his early 50s.
Yeah,
so he'd have to have had some 50-plus scores.
I think that Maureen, Jeff, for that excellent clue, becomes our C-Bus Super Performer of the Weekend.
Pew, 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 Seabus, pew. That's the new song. Look, for a fund that is as rewarding as that clue was for us, check out Seabus today. cbussuper.com.au/the final word. You can go there and see our faces and then find out information about superannuation. You should have some because then you will not be hungry when you're old.
Yes, don't make the same mistake that I made. And I'm going to take a punt that Jeff made and didn't touch it till I had a 3 in front of my age and had no idea what was going on. And I belatedly came to it and realised that I should have been on the ball a bit earlier. So cbussuper.com.au/the final word. They'll make it less daunting for you. I'm sure of that. They'll give you the sort of support you need to make good decisions. And if you want to learn more about them, you can get a product disclosure statement from cbussuper.com.au/the final word.
Who doesn't love a PDS? Right. Next up, Alex Crampton, $2.97. It was about a fleeting moment.
Oh, yes.
Adam came up with a really good one, which is that Graham Gooch got dropped on his way to 333 and got dropped 297 runs before the 333. So that was actually pretty good. But Alex said that was a bit too clever for what it actually is. He said it's more fleeting in the way that Kyle Mayers and in all likelihood Akshar Patel have fleeted recently. So we're looking for a player who's done really well right at the start and they're going to come back to earth at some point. Well, $2.97 could be 297, which is exactly the number of runs that Will Pekowski has averaged for Victoria as an opener since going up the order. He's only had about 3 innings there, I think.
Yep.
But that got him picked in the Australian Test side, and that was back in November when he last played in that spot and made 2 double hundreds in 3 innings, I think.
Yeah, it was. That must be that. I'm trying to work out how that works. Oh, right. So the average is 297. So he's been dismissed twice, having
2 out of 3.
2 out of 3
times,
innings.
I think,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
One of them was not out. Well, one of the 200s was not out from memory. But he hasn't played for Victoria since because he injured his shoulder in the Test match in Sydney, and he's had surgery and he's out. So at the moment, he still has an average of 297 as an opener for Victoria, but. If he gets to open again, it will probably come down, and that's what Alex is gesturing at, I believe.
He'll be back. That much is certain. Thank you, Alex Crampton, 297. Next up on the revisit list is Chris Jones with 116. Jeff, you talked about Walter Hadley's test ton. Chris replied that he enjoyed the stories about Walter Hadley, Corey Anderson, and especially the dusty old bastard yarn about Roger Hardigan. That must have been something that we did earlier on in the 116 arc, about the 100.
It was... The original clue was a career best that was overshadowed.
Oh, yes,
so you were looking at Roger Hardigan batting with Clem Hill.
On debut, making a century from number 8, and Clem Hill making 100 as well when he was nearly dying in the middle there at Adelaide Oval in a crucial sort of Ashes-defining partnership. So Chris goes on to say, looking through the 1907-08 Ashes certainly filled the void left by Test cricket ending in less than 2 days. So I suspect that Chris wrote us this note after the first of the Test matches at Ahmedabad. Yet the answer is a lot closer to home in a match briefly mentioned later in the same podcast. Chris Jones, and here's probably another clue, brackets, Birmingham.
Birmingham. All right, Chris. Well, nobody in international cricket has ever made 116 or taken 1 for 16 as their career best at Edgbaston. I can tell you that for a fact. I have confirmed that with all of the best sources. But if we want to go a level down for an overshadowed career best, wicketkeeper Keith Piper played for Warwickshire for 18 years and played exactly 200 first-class matches on the knocker. Very highly regarded as a wicketkeeper, didn't really have the chops to go up a level as a batsman, so he never played internationally. He averaged just over 20 for Warwickshire and just under 20 overall when you factor in his few miscellaneous first-class games. So he made 2 tons in those 18 years. The best of them was 116 not out. A great day for the keeper, had a good time, put on a big partnership, made it against Durham, 323-run partnership, wacko, absolute happy days. He just so happened to be in that partnership with Brian Charles Lara, who finished on 501 not out. So nobody paid a lot of attention to poor old Keith Piper, and interestingly, Keith's playing career finished in 2005 thanks to another number, 420, when he was failed a drug test for cannabis and had to wrap things up a bit earlier than prompted, which seems very unfair because I don't know about you, Adam, but if you wanted to think of something performance enhancing, there would be nothing worse than being stoned through a full day of first-class cricket. You know how long cricket takes normally? Imagine you've ripped a few of the Orchie bottle before you went out. It'd be the longest experience of your life. You'd be out there for about 46 hours internally in your head. It would just never stop. That is not helpful. That is not performance enhancing.
All I want to know was Keith Piper, was he rolling another blunt before walking out, or was it a DIY job? And if it was, I hope he cut the hose from the middle of the hose. Always ruin the neighbour's hose.
So look, unfortunate for Keith, but I think anyone who's been done over out of a professional sporting contract because of cannabis on a test, come off it, rescind all of it. Let everybody out of jail. It's getting legalised everywhere anyway. Just cool your jets on that one.
We talked about wanting to...
I'm sorry about that, Keith Piper. You got dudded twice.
We talked about wanting to meet the players who played in that infamous fixture in 1964 in Lahore. While we're doing that, let's party with Keith Piper. Bring him over bring him over with us. Maybe not with us. Maybe we can... he might get us in trouble on the flight there, but...
I just realised that the last name's very apt, actually.
All right, Jeff. Next up from an urban. Now, I stuffed this up. Best to take ownership over one's stuff-ups. There was some confusion over who caught Ricky Ponting in the 96 World Cup. I must have looked at the wrong scorecard, and thus I did not quite remember. Now I do.
Who caught Ricky Ponting? A new Netflix Ponting series.
Well, it was Sanjay Mandraker, and as reluctant as I am to big up that bloke, he was at backward point, a fine catch from the bowling of Venkatapati Raju, one of my favourite Indian players of that time. That was solved for us by the History of Netherlands podcast. They're some of our favourite pals on the internet. They don't have a lot going on at the moment due to their lockdown in Holland, and they've found this number out for us. He explains that I must have been mixed up about the World Cup catch by Sanjay Mandraker. So the 126 must refer to the bowling figures of Graham Gooch against India. He scored 333 in the first innings and bowled 6 overs, taking 1 for 26, and the wicket he took was that of the internet's most hated commentator, Sanjay Mandraker. Thank you, the History of Netherlands podcast, for reading that out. I am now even more sure that I'll never commentate again working for anyone in India. Pushkar Godbole also had some recollections of that day. I distinctly remember that catch. It would flash as part of the best catches every day for the duration of that World Cup and even months after. So Ponting caught Mandraker, bowled Raju is engraved in my memory. Gooch took 23 wickets in tests, including commentary colleagues Sanjay, Ravi Shastri, Sunil Gavaskar, who was Gooch's first test wicket, Jeff. So nicely tied together there by Pushkar.
Hope he gave him a birthday cake after taking the wicket as well. Here you go, Sonny. Have a cake, old mate. 147 from Jeff Price. Now, this was the Seax between two roses clue, which we deduced to mean someone playing for Middlesex between what we thought was Yorkshire and Lancashire, the two roses teams. Cynthia James did point this out, that in Alistair Cook's last innings, he was an Essex player who also have sea axes as their emblem. Figure that out. Joe Root, who is a Yorkshire player, batted with Cook, and then when Root got out, Johnny Bairstow came in, who was also a Yorkshire player. That could be Rose, Seax Rose, maybe. But Jeff sent us a clue as well to say that there are other roses in the county set up, not only Yorkshire and Lancashire. This all-rounder did play for one of the above. Okay. But how many county teams have roses as their emblems. Like, everyone, they've all got a rose. As soon as we started looking into this, because I thought, Rose Bowl, Hampshire, they play at the Rose Bowl. They must have a rose. And I looked it up, and they did. And I was trying to find a player who played at Hampshire and then Middlesex and then Hampshire. But then after a fair bit more looking around, we realised that there are about 10 other counties that all have roses as well. But there was a little bit of an extra clue from Jeff too, who said that he'd been cheeky and had to round the pledge down because you can't score 0.92 of a run. And so that meant that the number, rather than being 147, had to be 147.92, which means it has to be something divided by something. It means it has to be like a crazy series average or a strike rate or something in that genre. And so that's where we got to the point of thinking we were looking for something like that, and we realised that another frickin' county with a rose was Northamptonshire.
And I'm really glad this happened this way, because you were thoroughly stumped. Your lines of inquiry had expired, and we were talking it through on the phone, as we sometimes do with these numbers. Not all the time, but if we get a real curly one, we might sort of thrash it out on the phone. And we were thinking, well, who's played for Middlesex after playing for another county either side of it? And I just had this bolt of inspiration. Stephen Crook, our old mate Crookie, played for Middlesex between two stints at Northamptonshire. He'd also played elsewhere, but I knew that he'd played for Middlesex, and we checked it out. And so he had 2 seasons for Middlesex in 2011 and 2012. And of course, Jeff, became acquainted with and pals with Crookie after he made his century against the touring Australians in 2015. Probably one of the most enjoyable days I've ever had at any day of cricket. It was my birthday. On my birthday! Where you and I were calling for the BBC alongside Lizzie Ammon, Alex Winter and Daniel Norcross. And the 5 of us were sort of rotating through, sitting in the members' stand there at the county ground. As Stephen Crook, he was Australian by passport, and by that I mean he grew up in Australia, went to the Cricket Academy before moving to England on another passport and becoming part of the county circuit, but had his one magical day, and it just happened to be against the touring Australians. And not just any attack either. I mean, Pat Cummins bowling heat in his only game on tour. Mitchell Marsh bowling superbly that day, if memory serves me correctly. Nathan Lyon was in the attack. Peter Siddle was in the attack. And there was Crookie, who just went absolutely wild.
Yeah, he decided that, there was no point hanging around. They'd already lost the first day to rain. It was a 3-day fixture. So they effectively played a 2-day game, and they, for a while, looked like they were going to beat Australia by an innings within 2 days. Well, yeah, because the follow-on were cooked. Well, the follow-on becomes 100 when a 3-day game becomes 2 days before the fixture begins. It gets adjusted to 100 as the follow-on mark from 150, which meant that when Australia were reeling, thanks to it's going to annoy the hell out of me that I can't. Maurice Chambers. Maurice Chambers. He picked up in quick succession, I think, a couple of Marshes and a Voges perhaps, or something like that. Maybe Stephen Smith as well. And they were in strife before the close on day one. But yeah, and then Crookie on the second day takes 3 wickets and routs the middle order. But that century, 142 not out from 96 balls, 24 fours, 4 sixes, just over a couple of hours in the middle. And what I thought I might do, Jeff, because I still have it in the archives, is play the moment when Stephen Crook raises 3 figures.
But I'm also slightly worried we could find ourselves in a situation, of course, in which Crookie, trying to get to his 100, either doesn't manage it or indeed does manage it, but ends up with this lad Gleeson facing a ball from Pat Cummins, which he may not be equal to.
Mitchell Marsh with 4 for 34 to his name, bowled beautifully today. Hoiks it around square leg again. It's 4 runs. He got past the man at square leg. Up they go, the Northampton crowd. We're clapping in the box as well. That 100 runs in 77 balls, 19 boundaries, 1 6. Only 95 minutes at the crease. Better than a run a minute. That's a magnificent innings there by the Australian all-rounder. Well played, Stephen Crook.
So what you probably can't hear there is Norkie's next to me crying in the summariser chair. He described it later as his favourite moment of the year 2015, when he was around the country broadcasting all over the place. It was a joyous day. Crookie went on to, he's done a lot of things, hasn't he? He had a top 20 hit around the 2009 Ashes. He's a musician as well. I think for a time there we were trying to make him the UK's Eurovision contestant, weren't we, or something like that. He in 2009, I can't remember what it's called, something like Time for Heroes or something like that, or and thus he became the music correspondent for the All Out Cricket magazine, and had that little run there, and does a lot of work for charity. I've been to a couple of his charity events, so he's an all-round great guy. The former North Hants all-rounder, and Jeff, we had that great sort of night on the piss with him, because he makes that 100, and as is the custom, I suppose, it's not as though he was going to bed going for an ice bath and having a Powerade and going to bed. He was going to have a couple of beers and have a curry, and we all kind of got together for that. It was a wonderful experience on our first tour.
Yeah, 142 not out of 96, flogged them everywhere, and then he came back the next day with his ankles strapped up and took 3 for her, I reckon.
Yep.
Yeah, so they were at the point where they nearly bowled Australia out, and Pat Cummins saved them, made 86 not out, I think, and avoided the follow-on, and then got declared on, got them back on the bus before he could get a first-class 100, which he's still yet to do, and he's increasingly annoyed about that as the years go by, I think. So
that was a mistake in hindsight, I reckon. That was a mistake to declare on Cummins. If he posts 3 figures there, just like a bit of a psychological barrier cleared. And
totally.
Because it's weird now that a player of his capacity, it looks odd that he hasn't got a first-class 100.
Yeah, and it was absolutely in the bag, like the game was pretty much petering out. It's one of those things where you let him get it just so he can get it, nonetheless. That game had first-class status. World Series cricket? No, not going to get it. Liam Dalton, the 737 that we were looking at on the last show about JJ Ferris, Adam.
Yes, so it wasn't JJ Ferris. Liam informed us that we came weirdly close all the same. He goes on, my guy played in the same era. He's a slightly dustier DOB. His biggest cricketing moment also came on a South African tour, and he was even English in a way not too dissimilar from Ferris. My guy doesn't come with any tram stories that I'm aware of, although he was interested in unorthodox means of transport. Hopefully this helps you track him down. Jeff, do your best. 737, Liam Dalton.
There we go. Well, around the same time, travelling to South Africa, playing for England, although not being born there, Timothy Carew O'Brien, born in Dublin, took the Owen Morgan route over, pioneered that route before Owen could do so. A volatile Irish amateur who went to Oxford to play cricket almost exclusively, liked to bat, liked to have a go at the bowling right from the start. That was his style, no waiting around. He got 2 tests against visiting Australians 4 years apart. So the first time he played a test, he batted at 8 and didn't bowl, much like the Maharaja from earlier. Had the privilege of being Court Bannerman bowled Spofford. I mean, come on, if you're like a jobber, sort of, half-assed amateur cricketer jobbing around, Court Bannerman bowled Spofford. It was a wrong Bannerman, but still pretty good. Then he got bowled by Spofford in the second innings. 4 years later, he's in the top 6, gets bowled twice by Tara Turner. And then he got another chance on this South Africa tour in 1896 and made no runs either. So a career total of 8 innings, 3 ducks, 59 runs, top score 20, and an average of 7.37.
Numbers that are very in keeping with that time in Test cricket. Thank you, Liam Dalton, for coming back to us and giving us a couple of bites of the cherry on 737. Our penultimate revisit is from Trev. So Trev from Perth on 767. Now, we battled our way through DKVROW, which was the clue that we got through after I incorrectly identified Jeff Dimmick, 7 for 67 in 1979 in India. So Trev solved it for us, thankfully. He said, loved your work with my number. You were on the right track with the whacker. In that 1971 Rest of the World match, Lilly took 12 wickets, including 9 in a session. He picked up Farouk Engineer twice in 2 hours, as the rest of the world had to follow on. He finished with 12 for 92, or 7.67 runs per wicket. And that was the obscure bit, Trev says. Unfortunately, that match has faded into obscurity too, as it's not been granted test status by the powers that be. Perhaps because a full-strength Australian side played some obscure blokes called Clive Lloyd, Bisham Betty, Rowan Canai, Sunil Gavaskar, Tony Gregg, Zvi Abbas, and was captained by a guy named Sobers. Why would that match be called a test? Love the podcast. Keeps me sane on my daily commute. Well, thank you, Trev, as well. I mean, I understand intellectually why that wasn't a test match, but you do mount a pretty reasonable case there.
Yeah. I mean, was it as good as the Cyclone 11 versus the Femin 11? That's what I want to know. Did it really deserve it?
That would have got first class status. I suppose where I think that this gets muddied up is and I fully understand why the Tsunami game in 2005, early 2005, was given one-day international status, and I also get why the Cyclone game at Lords in 2018 between West Indies and the rest of the world team was granted T20 international status. I understand what they were trying to do on both occasions, but I think it does provide pause for thought as to whether those rest of the world games that were played throughout the course of the 1970s should also get that, or alternatively, whether those games in the 2000s should be relegated from international status. I think it's a worthwhile conversation.
One or the other. Yeah, you got to make a call in one direction. The last revisit, Paul Reeve, 214. We were talking about Mitali Raj making that in a test match. She'll get another chance this year. Paul said, not quite.
Yes, Paul said, hi both, a nice surprise to hear my name and my first Nerd Pledge pop-up today and your guess on what my 214 might be. Sadly, it's not a fantastic nerdy stat or a deep dive, so I'll see if I can nudge you along quickly. Being part of a double header was highly appropriate, and it's just a shame that Anna Forsyth was referring to something different. My 214 was just a little bit too old to also feature a bolt from the blue, but his bolt includes in brackets U, so B-O-U-L-T, bolt from the blue, Jeff.
Yes, because Anna Forsyth also had 214, which related to a crossbow bolt, which we did get correct. So Paul Reeves' 214 must be Matthew Sinclair's 214 on debut. Boxing Day 1999 in Wellington. The real Boxing Day test is in Wellington. That's the real quiz. The second day is when he made the double. He made 100 on the first day and went on to 214 on the second day. One of the very few double centuries on as debut hundreds. So there've been 109 maybe debut test centuries, but 7 of them have been double centuries. Lawrence Rowe, Tip Foster, Jacques Rudolph, Michelle Gosco, Brendan Kurupu, Kyle Mayers recently joined that club. Matthew Sinclair played his last test in 2010 and Trent Bolt debuted in 2011. So that is just a little bit too old, as Paul said, to cross paths with T. Bolt.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Well worked out, Jeff. I just wanted to add that there are so many of our stories come back to the last week of 1999 because there were 3 test matches being played concurrently. So Australia-India, which is a brilliant Tendulkar century, Brett Lee's wickets on debut. Then you've got in South Africa, Gary Kirsten making the record score for that nation in Test cricket in the final innings across day 4 and day 5. He makes his 275. And as you've mentioned already, Matthew Sinclair at Wellington for New Zealand against the West Indies, which stood out as a rare feat, a young man making a double ton at the first time of asking. But just to detour via that final day in South Africa, 9 bowlers England used in that final day to try and break up the partnership that Kirsten was putting on with. Well, I don't think it was with anyone in particular. He was just batting all day. They ended up adding over 500, and it was a really slow, turgid finish to the Test match after they had lost the chance to win. But what I thought was worth noting is that the only bowler who didn't get a chance, or the only fielder who didn't get a chance to bowl in that innings for England was Michael Atherton, because, of course, by that stage of his career, his back was rooted. He bowled leg breaks earlier on, but not by that stage. And the final wicket to be taken on that final day, so the final wicket of the 1900s, or that whole century, was taken by the guest of our show, Jeff, just this week, Mark Butcher. The final wicket of the 1990s was Mark Butcher skittling Lance Klusener.
And he got Gary Kirsten out as well for the 275. He bowled him round his legs. He was bowling off breaks around the wicket to a left-hander, floated one across him, pitched outside the leg stump. Kirsten tried to nudge it away. He missed it, and it turned back and hit the woodwork. And I think the one to get Klusener was turned a long way as well. So, Mark Butcher got a little bit of joy with the ball.
And if you haven't listened to our Mark Butcher interview, we will not talk to him about that, I can assure you. But plenty of other stuff gets talked about, and we've received some lovely responses to that over the last couple of days, so you'll see that in the feed or on YouTube as well. We've popped that entire interview up there if you want to see Mark's face while he talks to the final word.
So a couple of quick confirmations of the ones we got right. Bernie Prinz said that his $2.70, well, as far as I can tell, indeed referred to the number of runs Stuart McGill conceded in Test matches at Bellerive Oval. I'll assume that's right because Bernie sent me a long list of other Bellerive stats involving the number 27, including Chaminda Vasa's ODI economy rate, Peter Siddle taking 2 for 70, Xavier Doherty's bowling strike rate in one-day internationals, amongst others, sports betting enthusiast Chris Cairns bowled 27 overs at Bellerive in ODIs. All good to know. Ian Bounds said that Adam was correct with the answer, but gave it to the wrong contributor. So this is where we had a double header, and Adam allocated the cap number of Tony Lewis?
Yes.
Which was indeed the number that Ian wanted you to solve. We gave Ian something to do with David Warner. But whatever answer we give to a double header could apply to anybody, and so it did.
Yeah, that's the third time in the last 2 weeks when we've had a double header and we've got the numbers around the wrong way. So thank you, Ian, who, of course, is a big Glamorgan fan. Anna Forsyth, we've already mentioned her 214. She says, bravo, Jeff, bullseye with the arrow. Jeff noting that was Middlesex's score when the arrow flew into the oval in their late season game in 2017. Anna adds that it's bad that I meant macabre because Middlesex got docked 2 points for a slow over rate in an uncompleted game and then went down by 2 points. I mean, I'm also glad Rory Burns didn't die, but I mean, arrows, foxes, and that kind of nonsense, just typical south of the river stuff. So that Middlesex-Surrey rivalry, which Anna wears close to her heart.
And Scott Lamprecht's 219 relating to India's first test visit from England that we referred to earlier. This is also likely to be right because Scott's message was, nice work with the 219. Not sure about the joke, re my last name, but my kids thought it was hilarious. This was something to do with Scott Lamprecht, the destruction of an illumination object. I can't be held responsible for the quality of the jokes on this show.
And Jeff, that's the end of our confirmations. Final segment, as we do each week on the show, is we look at a bannerman. And I flagged this up on the weekly show that we had an absolute corker from Thomas Melia, and that we do. From 1890, this is, we have Thomas Melia bringing to our attention the day when, for Lord Sheffield's 11 against the 1890 touring Australians, W.G. Grace made 20 opening the batting, and they were all out for 27. So Turner and Ferris take 4 for 9 and 5 for 18 respectively, but 20 out of 27, Jeff. I mean, that's an all-time great, 74%. But just look at that card. It's preposterous. Thomas adds that it's the first game of the tour and Billy Murdoch's big return to big cricket, as it was termed back then, after a 5-year absence. He made 93 before the heavens opened. Grace made 16 of the first 18 runs before being the 6th out with the score on 23. So he'd actually made 20 out of 23 when he was out. From a bannerman perspective, it was Grace's third of 3 time where he scored over 70% of the team runs. So Grace finished with 3 bannermans himself personally. The other 2 were his 122 out of 173 in the South versus North game in 1870 and 126 out of 159, 79% for the United South of England against the United North of England in 1876, in keeping with our strange first-class team names theme of today. Of all players, only Frank Woolley has made 70% of his side's total twice, and only Grace has done it 3 times. Jeff, fantastic work there in the spreadsheet minds from Thomas Melia.
And as Grace's team were bowled out for 27, that must have been why all those years later, Dera Ismail Khan decided to be bowled out for 27 as well, in tribute, an homage to the work of the great Dodge Master.
Well, it must be said that took 28 overs for them to be skittled for 27. Of course, remember that our friends at Dera Ismail Khan got bowled out twice in the space of 28 overs, but another link there as well.
Yep. And our last note to finish from Elise Gain, who wrote in after we were talking about pub cricket and people being no good at cricket and playing it anyway, and this is something I would encourage because, I know there are lots of people who listen to the show who have played lots of cricket, and it seems kind of foreign, the idea that anybody could not know how to play it or feel comfortable playing it. But there's, I'm sure, another chunk of listeners who love cricket and watching it but would feel hugely embarrassed and hesitant to actually go and play. But if you can, find a way to make yourself, to push yourself a little bit, or to find the kind of club where they welcome people of that kind of ability who aren't confident and aren't necessarily going to be highly physically coordinated and all the rest of it. It is possible to have a great time even though you don't think that you're the kind of person who would be able to have a great time doing it. And so we had this note from Elise saying, after hearing that episode, about having or not having cricket skills, I thought I would share with you the fact that this morning I padded up for the first time since high school 15 years ago for a net session with some friends, and I'm pleased to report that I remember how to bowl and hit down the leg side, but I definitely wasn't connecting the bat with anything that required me to move my front foot. Well, it was lovely to hear, Elise, and thank you for letting us know.
Well, of course, Jeff, you don't move your front foot much either, so it's proof that it's possible. It's opening up the offside by swivelling those hips and clearing extra cover as you did in the last game for the Dan O'Connell.
That's it.
It all works.
It.
And maybe
Only
Elise,
as
you
good
can.
as your last shot.
Well, maybe Elise, you can be part of our team that goes and plays for Dera Ismail Khan next year in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Let's start putting a final word 11 together now. If you're inclined to come to Pakistan with us next year, I mean, I'm thinking on the fly here, but I'm sure we can do some sort of final word tour.
You have not cleared this with me, but look.
What, you mean like the last time Australia played Pakistan in the away series? I did something I didn't clear with you either, and it worked out okay.
Yeah, just a bit.
Jeff, after I looked down at my clock, an hour and 48 minutes, an hour and 49 minutes, it's time for us to bring this episode to an end. It's been another most rewarding episode of Storytime, I think. Certainly the research part of it and the enjoyable conversation that we've had. Thanks to everybody who's either made a nerd pledge, edited a nerd pledge, sent an updated nerd pledge. Just so gratifying that some of the old firm, like patrons of ours who've been there for 2 years now, have recently updated their numbers so we can come through and thank them once again for their contributions, because a big part of this is wanting to thank people for being part of our story, our final word story, and helping us do what we do week to week, month to month, and indeed year to year. So thank you everybody for that. If you want to get involved, patreon.com/the final word. If you want to listen to the Mark Butcher interview, please do so. As I say, I think there's plenty in that. It's about a lot more than his cricketing career or his commentary career. Really, it's kind of about the bond between father and son, which is quite strong and fascinating to hear Mark Butcher articulate that so eloquently. And lastly, thank you to Bad Producer Productions. We're on their label, BPP, badproducerproductions.com. Thank you to Dave Collins for editing the show week to week. Thank you to Jeff for all of your work. And that should be where we leave it. Have a lovely weekend. This is the Final Word Story Time. Until next week, bye for now.
See you later.